I'm 35 years old, living in Ohio, and for most of my life I was just another face in the crowd. I worked long hours at jobs that drained me, barely earning enough to survive, all while swallowing disrespect from bosses and coworkers. At home, things weren't much different. My family never treated me as someone worth much. I was the invisible one, the middle child who never made anyone proud. My family is made up of my parents, two brothers, and a sister. My older brother, Colton, was always their star. My parents invested in his future, helped him launch a marketing company, and bragged about his every achievement as if he were the family's crowning jewel. My younger brother, Silas, never held down a job for long. At 30, he was still living in our parents' house, drifting from one plan to the next without results. My sister, Lydia, was the one carrying the heaviest load. She worked as a supermarket cashier, raising two small kids by herself, struggling to keep a roof over their heads. And then there was me, Merrick, the son no one talked about, the one who didn't get invited into family decisions, the one who was expected to manage on his own. When I lost my job at 26, my parents didn't even offer me their couch. When my car broke down and I asked Colton for a loan, he smirked and told me, "Some people are born to stay at the bottom. Maybe you're one of them." Those words burned into me, but I buried the anger and kept going. Then this year, everything changed. I bought a lottery ticket like I had countless times before. Except this time, my numbers hit. It wasn't a mega jackpot, but after taxes, I walked away with a little over $18 million. Enough to rebuild my entire life. For weeks I was in shock. I hired a lawyer, put together an investment strategy, and made sure no one, absolutely no one, found out. Outwardly, I lived as though nothing had changed. Same cheap apartment, same routine, same beat-up car. But inside, everything was different. For the first time in my life, I had the power to decide my own future. And before I did anything with it, I wanted to test the very people who had ignored me for decades. I told my family I had lost my job because the company shut down. I said I was behind on bills, my car had finally died, and I might not be able to make rent that month. I needed help, just a little breathing room. The responses told me everything I needed to know. Colton chuckled, almost like he enjoyed seeing me down. He said he could offer me a warehouse assistant job at his company, just above minimum wage, if I wanted to prove my worth. It wasn't an offer of support, it was a chance for him to watch me beg. My parents shook their heads. They said their own expenses were too tight, though I knew they had no debts and lived comfortably off retirement checks. To them, my hardship was just another inconvenience. Silas shrugged. "That's rough, man," he muttered, before going back to his phone. That was the extent of his concern. And then there was Lydia. She didn't hesitate. She opened her worn-out wallet and handed me $200, money I knew she couldn't spare. She asked if I had food in my fridge. She told me I could crash on her small couch if I needed to. She didn't ask for repayment, didn't judge me, didn't hesitate. She just wanted to make sure I was okay. It wasn't about the money, it was the way she gave it. The quiet love behind the act. That moment broke something open in me. I realized Lydia, the one with the least, had given me the most. From then on, the choice was clear. I pulled back from everyone else. I let Colton, Silas, and my parents believe I was drifting away. Only Lydia knew where I lived. She never pried, never demanded answers. Just sent messages checking if I needed food or help. She had no idea she'd passed the test, and that soon, she would be the only one I'd bring into the truth. After Lydia proved where her heart really stood, I knew I had to act differently with the rest of the family. I stopped sharing details about my life. I moved to a new apartment, using a legal intermediary so my name wouldn't be on public records. I bought a newer car, nearly identical to my old one, just safer and reliable, nothing flashy. To anyone watching, it looked like I had landed a stable job, nothing more. Behind the scenes, I was rebuilding myself. I spent weeks studying investments, meeting with financial advisors, and designing a plan that wouldn't burn out. I didn't want to be another story of a lottery winner who blew through everything in 5 years. I wanted structure, legacy, something real. That's when I had the idea to create my own company. Not some massive corporation, but a consulting firm that specialized in helping small family-owned businesses restructure and survive. I knew what it felt like to be underestimated. I knew how many people were out there struggling the same way I once had. If I could build something sustainable, I'd be changing lives, not just my own. The first hire I made was Darren, a guy I'd worked with years ago. He wasn't flashy, never ambitious in a loud way, but he was decent. I remembered how he used to drive me home when I didn't have gas money. He'd wave off my attempts to chip in, saying, "Just keep me company on the ride." When I offered him a supervisor role with a strong salary, he almost cried. "Are you sure I'm worth this much?" he asked. I told him, "You're worth more." I handed him the keys to a company car and told him to choose the model. He hugged me so hard I thought he'd break my ribs. Moments like that lit something in me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about building something solid, something fair. Meanwhile, Lydia kept being Lydia, checking in, offering food, asking nothing in return. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to become the cornerstone of everything I was creating. I was quietly assembling a future while my family still thought I was the same overlooked, struggling Merrick they had always dismissed. But soon enough, they'd find out that wasn't true. By the time 6 months had passed, the consulting firm was stable. We had 3 steady clients, money flowing, and a small but loyal team. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was steering something forward. But there was one thing left undone. Lydia still thought I was scraping by. She still sent texts asking if I needed leftovers, still offered her couch, still asked nothing of me. She had no idea I had the power to change her life entirely. One Friday afternoon, I drove out to her small rental house. The kids were playing with a bucket of water in the yard while she tended to some plants on the porch. She saw me and smiled like she always did, calm, unhurried, genuine. We sat together, drank coffee, played with the kids for a while. Then I asked her to step inside so we could talk privately. My heart was racing. I told her everything. The lottery, the 18 million, the test I had given the family. I told her how she was the only one who stepped up when I needed it, and how that single act had changed everything for me. She sat there quietly for a long moment. Then she looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Merrick, I didn't help you because I expected anything. I helped because I love you. Because I know what it feels like to be treated like you don't matter." Those words nearly broke me. The next day, I took her and the kids to see 3 different houses. I told her to pick one. She chose the simplest, a cozy place with a yard where her kids could run, and an old iron stove she said reminded her of childhood. I paid in cash. I also bought her a car. She insisted it didn't need to be new, just something reliable with enough space for the kids. And I set up tuition for her children at a good school, fully covered. Finally, I offered her a position at my company. At first she refused, saying she wasn't qualified. Then she agreed on one condition: "You have to teach me properly. I want to do this right." In that moment, Lydia stopped being just my sister. She became my partner, my anchor, the one person I could finally trust with the truth. Not long after Lydia joined me, word started to spread in the family that I had stabilized. My parents assumed I had finally gotten a steady job, maybe some warehouse gig or office work. They didn't ask, didn't care enough to know the details. I let them believe what they wanted. But Colton's world was beginning to crack. His marketing company, the one my parents had poured money into and bragged about for years, was drowning in debt. He had overextended, bought luxury he couldn't afford, and built his business on image instead of substance. One evening, I got a call from him. His voice was calmer than usual, but underneath I could hear desperation. He asked if we could meet. We sat down at a coffee shop the next day. He walked in wearing his tailored suit and expensive watch, but his eyes gave him away, nervous, restless, hollow. He smiled like nothing was wrong, but within minutes, he leaned in and started talking numbers. He needed investors. He needed someone to bail him out. He needed me. I listened quietly, sipping my coffee. Then I set my cup down and said, "Colton, I'll help, but only under one condition. I buy your company outright. And if you stay, you work under me." He laughed at first, a sharp, dismissive laugh. But then I pulled out a folder my lawyer had prepared. Inside was proof of my assets, accounts, holdings, investments. His laugh died in his throat. "You're serious," he whispered. "Dead serious," I said. His pride was bleeding through his silence. For years, he had been the untouchable one, the star of the family. And now I was the one holding the cards. He finally muttered, "If I don't sell, the company collapses." I nodded. That's the reality. Within weeks, the deal was done. I bought the company outright. Lydia stepped in as administrative manager, while I placed Colton in a mid-level role. No corner office, no flashy title, just real work with real accountability. For the first time in his life, Colton had to clock in and prove himself. And for the first time in my life, I was the one holding him accountable. It didn't take long for the news to reach my parents. Somehow, they pieced together that I had taken over Colton's company. At first, they thought it was a temporary arrangement, that I was just helping him out. But once they realized I was the new owner, their tone shifted. They invited me to dinner. That in itself was rare. Growing up, most family dinners revolved around Colton's achievements, while I was treated like an afterthought. Now they wanted me at the table. When I arrived, the atmosphere was stiff. My father, Howard, sat at the head like always, his fork tapping against the plate. My mother, Elaine, hovered with that brittle smile she wore when she was masking frustration. We ate in near silence until Howard finally said, "So, you've taken quite an interest in business. Interesting, considering you never showed that kind of drive before." I kept my tone even. People change when they stop being underestimated. Elaine jumped in. "We're just surprised you'd push Colton out of his own company. After everything we invested in him, you swoop in and take control. That doesn't seem fair." That word, fair, hit me hard. Fairness was never offered to me. When I needed help, I got excuses. When I struggled, I got silence. And now, after decades of neglect, they wanted to talk about fairness. I leaned forward, looking at both of them. Fair would have been you offering me the same support you gave Colton. Fair would have been you standing by me when I was scraping by. Fair isn't giving everything to one child and crumbs to the others. Howard's face hardened. "Don't turn this into a pity party. You've always been sensitive." I almost laughed. Sensitive? No. What I was now, was awake. I stood, placing my napkin on the table. "Here's what you need to understand. I didn't swoop in. I built. I invested. I created something that works. And Colton works for me now because he couldn't handle it himself. That's not theft. That's reality." Elaine called after me as I walked out, her voice tight with anger. "Don't forget who raised you." But the truth was, they hadn't raised me. They had tolerated me, and I wasn't going to tolerate them anymore. Of all my siblings, I thought Silas would be the last to reproach me. He had drifted for years, bouncing between odd jobs and half-baked schemes, always back at my parents' house when things fell apart. But once word spread that I was doing well, it didn't take long. He showed up at my apartment one evening, unannounced. Same old Silas, torn hoodie, careless grin, acting like nothing ever changed. "Hey man," he said, sliding onto my couch like he lived there. "Heard you've got something going now. Consulting or whatever." I was thinking, maybe you could bring me on board. I studied him. "Doing what?" He shrugged. "I dunno. Something easy. Something that pays. You know I'm a people person." That was Silas in a nutshell. Always wanting the reward, never willing to put in the effort. I remembered the test I'd given the family months earlier, how he'd barely looked up from his phone when I told him I was broke. And now here he was, asking for a handout disguised as an opportunity. I leaned back. "Silas, the work we do isn't easy. It takes commitment. It takes learning new systems, long hours, and showing up on time every day. You think you can do that?" He grinned wider. "Come on, man, you know I'm not built for the 9-to-5 grind. But your family, just set me up with a paycheck, and I'll make you look good. No one has to know." I felt the anger rising, but I kept my voice calm. "Silas, that's the problem. You've spent your whole life trying to skip the work. And when I needed help, you couldn't even look me in the eye. Lydia gave me her last dollar. You gave me nothing. Why should I give you anything now?" His smile faltered. "Because I'm your brother."
I shook my head. Being a brother isn't about blood. It's about what you show when someone is down. You failed that test. He muttered something under his breath, grabbed his hoodie, and stormed out. I watched from the window as he stomped down the street, his pride more wounded than his circumstances. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about saying no. While Colton adjusted to his new role and Silas sulked in the shadows, Lydia was thriving. She came into the company hesitant at first, always second-guessing herself, always saying things like, "I'm not smart enough for this," or "You should have hired someone better." But I knew her better than that. Lydia wasn't just capable, she was resilient. She had spent years juggling 2 kids, late-night shifts, and overdue bills without breaking. That kind of endurance was exactly what my company needed. So I invested in her the way no one had ever invested in me. I paid for business courses, paired her with mentors, and gave her real responsibility. At first, she handled scheduling and payroll. Then she began managing projects, negotiating with clients, and streamlining operations. Within a year, she was running the day-to-day better than I ever could. Employees respected her, clients trusted her. Even Darren, the first person I had hired, said, "Lydia's the one keeping this place together." One evening, after everyone left, I stayed behind with her in the office. Papers were scattered across the desk, her coffee cup half empty. She sighed and said, "I don't know why you trust me with all this. I was just a cashier a year ago." I smiled. "No, you were never just anything. You were surviving with nothing. That takes more strength than half the executives I've met. You've always had this in you. You just never had the chance." Her eyes watered, but she didn't cry. She just nodded and went back to work, like she always did. By the end of that year, I made it official. Lydia was promoted to Vice President of Operations. I gave her a salary that allowed her to finally breathe, plus a stake in the company itself. She tried to argue against the ownership part, but I insisted. "This isn't just my company anymore," I told her. "It's ours." Her kids noticed the change too. They had new clothes, new schools, a safe home. But more than that, they had a mother who wasn't constantly exhausted, who finally had time to smile. Watching Lydia rise became the most satisfying part of my journey. She had given without expectation. Now she was reaping without guilt. The more Lydia rose, the more the rest of the family noticed the shift. She had a new car, a better house, and a calmness in her voice that money couldn't fake. People talk, and eventually my parents and Silas began to put the pieces together. It came to a head at another family dinner, this time at my parents' house. I hadn't planned on going, but Lydia asked me to come, just to keep the peace. The moment I walked in, I felt the tension. Silas was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, glaring. Colton sat stiffly at the table, avoiding my eyes. Elaine fussed with dishes, while Howard cleared his throat like he was preparing for a speech. Finally, my mother said it outright. "Merrick, how long were you planning to keep this a secret? You win the lottery, build a company, buy out your brother's business, and you don't think your family deserves to know?" I let the words hang in the air before answering. "Deserve? When I told you I was broke, not one of you helped me. Except Lydia. She gave me what little she had without hesitation. That told me everything I needed to know." Silas slammed his hand on the table. "That was a damn test? You tricked us?" I met his eyes. "It wasn't a trick. It was a truth. When people think you have nothing, that's when their real selves come out, and you all showed me exactly who you are." Colton finally spoke, his voice bitter. "So what? You're punishing us forever? You think you're better than us now?" I leaned forward. "No, I don't think I'm better. I just don't owe you anymore. Not explanations, not money, not loyalty you never gave me." Howard's face flushed red. "We're your blood. That means something." I shook my head. "Blood means nothing without love." Lydia proved that. The rest of you? You only came back when you smelled success. The room went silent. The only sound was the clatter of Elaine's fork hitting her plate. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the quiet one shrinking in the corner. I was the one setting the terms, and they hated it. After that dinner, the divide was permanent. My parents stopped calling unless it was about money. Silas drifted further away, blaming me for his failures. Colton worked under me with a resentment he could barely contain, though he never dared quit. He needed the paycheck too badly. But Lydia? She stood stronger than ever, and for once I felt like I wasn't carrying my world alone. A year after that confrontation, I hosted a gathering. Not at my parents' house, but at mine. Not everyone was invited. Just Lydia, her kids, Darren and his wife, and a few of the employees who had become like family. We grilled in the backyard, the kids chased each other across the grass, and laughter filled the air. At one point, Lydia sat next to me, watching her children play. "You ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Cutting them off?"
I thought about it, the years of being invisible, the way they only showed up when they wanted something, the dinner where they called me sensitive for demanding fairness. Then I looked at her, at the peace in her face, the pride in her children, the life we had built together. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret a thing. I didn't lose a family. I just learned who my real family was." She smiled, leaning her head on my shoulder. For the first time, I realized that winning the lottery wasn't the real victory. The real win was clarity. Money only amplified what was already true. Greed exposes, love proves itself, and loyalty can't be faked. My parents may never forgive me. Silas may never grow up. Colton may never let go of his pride. But none of that mattered anymore. Because I had Lydia, and I had built something lasting. The boy they once overlooked was gone. In his place was a man who knew his worth, who knew exactly who stood by him when the world thought he had nothing.
And that was everything.